What it do, Internet? David Baugh here, and today I wanted to go over color correction. I've been seeing a lot of pictures of people saying, oh my god, look what color correction can do. It's pretty crazy, and it is pretty crazy. So today we're going to get into a little bit further, and I wanted to do a primer on color correction so that you could do all the same things those people are doing. But I've just got a few shots here. It's just B-roll. It's nothing too crazy. I am editing in Final Cut Pro with a program called Color Finale. Neither of these companies are sponsoring this video, although if you wanted to, I would not be opposed. But let's get into it. So a few things before we get started. I wanted to go over scopes and how to read them. So vector scope is going to tell you the color of an image. It's going to tell you where in the image your stuff is sitting. You can see here, there's the green from this, right? There's the skin tone. It is pretty heavily favoring that sort of thing here. You can also tell the image is pretty desaturated. The blacks don't go all the way down, so there's not a whole lot of contrast. This would be a Luma track. I forget the exact name for it is, but it's your Luma channel, I guess you could say. There's also RGB Parade, which would show you that same information that you would see in a Luma curve, or in a Luma track here, but it is showing it to you all right on top of each other, so you can isolate your image even further. You can also do just blue or just green or just the reds in the image here, whatever you want to do. I tend to like them all stacked on top of each other because it tells me a lot of information. When something is white, it's going to track right on top, so you can see that's there, right? So now that we've got and this is the RGB Parade told in histogram view. So this is telling us blacks over here, whites over here. There is a pretty big gap there, but it is going all the way white. Now, let's open this up. You generally have a few different controls here. You're going to see a lot of programs are going to do it in these different blocks here, whether you're using DaVinci Resolve, or you're using Lumetri Scopes, or you're using Color Finale like I am here. They generally all show it to you the same way. Even Final Cut Pros is going to show you it the same sort of stuff. They added a master slider in there. These are all free tools that come with it, but I prefer to use not this, but Color Finale, because it adds some other features that I enjoy. Now you have master controls on the side for, say, lift would be the dark end. You see how this raises this amount here. If we wanted to bring it down, that would show us, you can get much closer to black. It adds a lot of contrast, right? You can also reset it. Right, that would be your lift. Your gamma is your midtones, or the center of the image, right? It does sort of affect the lowlights because it blends the white and black together. So if you wanted to go lower, you can go lower. If you want to go higher, you can go higher, right? Your gain is going to be the top piece. So when we raise this, you see this bar goes up because that's what's changing. And you see the white sort of blows out, right? You can also see that once you get past a certain level, it all just flatlines and you start losing color. But if we bring it down within tolerances, say here, right? And I like to expand the middle region a little bit as well, just to get it going like that. Now, these three different sections would be still lift, gamma, and gain, but I can take individual color pieces and I can change it. So in the low lights, say here, like this is going to be a good area to check. If I wanted to add green in, for instance, you can see how that takes the black level and it mixes green in. You can also see how now it's not white anymore, right? This would need correction of some sort. Whereas the image didn't really need that to begin with. Generally speaking, if you wanted to warm it up a little bit, you can add in a little bit more orange. If you wanted to give a nice sort of cinematic, more blue and teal look, you can go that way, or what have you. Anything you want, really. Let's see here. So, and it gives a nice before and after. This is what it was before. This is it now. Definitely richer colors. We can also change the gamma. Changes just the midtones. So you can dial that in to be what you want. Kind of like that there. Let's get the highlights as well. Just a little bit more. Right? Color correction. It's amazing. It's an amazing thing. So it adds just a richness, much more vibrancy. Right? So that's just a standard sort of base correction. You're not really changing anything too crazy. We're kind of expanding on the contrast by expanding the amount that this takes up. And we are bringing in more saturation. You also have, this would be a saturation slider, so we can change. Saturation is going to change the way in which colors are presented. So this is taking those colors and they are presenting them at a much higher rate. You could also go down the other way and then it's black and white, right? Or you could find some variation there in the middle somewhere that you like. Get you just a little bit more, right? So we started with this, we ended with this with this is just the color correction part of this, just the very base color wheels. There are other things that we call curves adjustments. What a curves adjustment would do is it actually shows, so you're seeing the white part and the dark parts, right? You can change individual colors. So I can say I want to take there we go. So I want to take this here. So I want to bring it up. You see how that's changing the way in which light is reflected, right? So it, on the really low end, you start to bleed a lot of your dark colors together. You start to get a lot of your light colors together here, right? Some things that one could do with this is you could make what's called an S-curve. Come on. There we go. So say I want my darks to go a little bit on the high end, I want my lights to go on the low end, right? Or I could go, the opposite is usually how I go with this, but I could say, yep, I want my dark tones here to go that way, and then my light tones to go this way. Now, with the curves adjustment, a little bit goes a long way. You don't really want to go too insane with it, or your image starts to get pretty crazy pretty quick. But you can make nice adjustments to it. You can change some of the contrast. You can add more in or take more out if you wanted, which is pretty good. I generally like my water to be a little bit more blue. So we can make adjustments to it, as you do. I try and stay away from curves adjustments because it is more of a destructive method. For instance, this is now how they're seeing light, right? So I can go way up, go way down. You can still make a lot of the same adjustments as you can with the scopes, but it is more destructive. These lights are now presenting differently as opposed to the way that they were before, or your darks can be presenting differently than the way that they were before, and it doesn't take too much before it's getting cartoony. We're losing some details here in some of these black portions because of how far this goes down. So it's definitely something to be aware of. Let's take a look at some of these other options, and let's talk about some of the more advanced features. Now, if I want to, say, take this, and I like the rest of this image, but I just, I really want that red to be a little bit different. You can isolate colors and start from there. So I can actually take the hue of this red and change it to be something else. You can see that it does affect all of the red tones in an image, which skin tones get affected by that red. So you need to be careful not to go too far with this. But if I want, say, a really vivid red out of this, I can get that. I can change luminosity. I can change how bright or dark that image is, right? I can change saturation values. So I can make this, much more muted tone. We can go more orange with it that way, whatever we want. This would be called color isolation. I can also probably isolate some other colors here. Maybe this, that's definitely the bricks in the back there. We can make this whole image a little bit brighter or darker. We can add some more features into those different things. You can isolate the colors. There's a few different ways to do this. In Color Finale, it allows me to isolate these pretty easily, just based on, pretty common colors, things like that. If there's no green, for instance, in this image, it's not going to do it. Although there's a little bit up in this car here that's getting affected by it, but I can dial that in to whatever shade that I want, which is a great way of doing things. You can also create a color mask if you wanted to. So if I go into here, I go to add a color mask. I can say only this color, and you see how it's highlighting things. You want it to get only those colors. If you press shift, it's going to add those to those colors so we can further isolate. I want to add this into, get around this license plate, maybe this here. Right, so I've added this. If I didn't want something, say I don't want it up here because I don't want any of this stuff here, I press the Option key and it will subtract. Then I can go into this color mask specifically. I can open up my curves adjustments here, and I can actually just isolate the color of this. If I want to bring this down much darker, I can make it a more subdued color. I'm not affecting any of this because I'm doing it as a mask, so only this one. You can see in the hierarchy here, this is the only effect, but if I had other effects underneath that, that would affect that too. I can go much more blue in the dark tones. So say you had a character whose car needs to be this color. Now it's that color. If we can get a model of car that's similar, we can make that work. Obviously, planning in advance is going to be your best friend when working with color correction. But, definitely something you can do so we can have a before and after. Just isolate that car specifically. Just some of the fun you can have with it. Now let's say that I want her face to have a little bit of color, but the rest of the image to be, black and white, right? We want to be able to show some of that, but not do too much. I am going to open up another plugin. This one is SliceX. We can go into all these another time if you so chose, and I'm going to track it along the points here. So let's say this is the area that we want. And I'm going to track it with Mocha, which is what SliceX does here. If you're using DaVinci Resolve, these would be called power windows. If you are not, then it's whatever you want it to be. It's generally a color correction mask is what it's referred to as. So another important thing to note here, now we have our effects and they all go in an order. So you're basically looking at it top down. So we have our color correction shape mask here. It is feathered out and good to go, right? But what's happening is this one is above it. So if we move this here, right? So that's one way to change footage. So you've got your different things there. And this will track her along a vector. Let's see if it'll play for us. Now sometimes you've got a lot of time to get your image exactly the way that you want. Sometimes you don't. And there is a way to do things a little bit quicker. You want to be very careful with this, as it could create some problems for you in the future. There are what's called a LUT, or lookup table is what it stands for. Now this is going to have, you can have LUTs that will change your image from one specific file type to another one. So from an Alexa log file to this, right? It'll let you do all sorts of things here. You can say add that. You see it changes the way that the image is. You very, very rarely just set these and forget these. It's more of a matter of choosing one that is similar to the way that you like it. So we can go, let's say this one, the CineStyle S-curve. So I imagine it's adding the S-curve in that we talked about before, right? Oh, and then once you've got a LUT applied, you can still obviously make adjustments to your heart's content. So we want to bring it, you don't want to be outside of spec, which would be up above the 100 or the 0. We don't want to go too crazy with it. Let's say this image is a little blue. Let's take out some of that. Get a little bit closer to where we would see it normally. Make some small adjustments here. Right? And then you get something, you'll have something usable. So this is what we had before, which is still not bad. This is what we have now, definitely a lot closer to white. That S-curve is really making an effect on it. You can tell if I take this off, totally different image. It is easy to fall into a trap of using a whole lot of LUTs and then getting yourself into problems, so you want to use it very sparingly, and not every one is going to look good on every video, not every image responds the same. Some of this is also going to look different because of what we had on there before, so going this way, definitely something to do. So let's try this footage here again. I just wanted to show one last thing. Now this is going to be, this is hue versus hue, so I can take, let's see, command click to add a control point, right? I can move this, I can change the hue of that specific color, and you can see how it shifts all of the hues in a line to change that color, right? If I wanted to, say, take one individual piece, say I want just these blues to be different, I can add multiple control points and then pull this up, right? So just that blue comes up. You know, it does sort of affect this, so I can actually make this a linear curve as opposed to a smooth curve, and then it just isolates that color that much further, right? So I can go purple with it or green with it. Obviously, any adjustment that you make is going to come with a certain amount of changes, so be careful with this one as well. There's also hue versus saturation. So I can say in these blue, because there's a lot of blue in this image, in these blue pixels, I want to change the saturation. So I want this to be real saturated, as opposed to down here where I want it to be way desaturated, right? Hue versus the luminance, that's saying I want this blue to be much darker or much brighter. So I can isolate my image even further that way and go forth. Saturation versus luminance. So the brighter that it gets, the more saturated it gets, right? So on and so forth. Saturation versus saturation. You're saying I want the brighter side of this image to be more saturated or less saturated. Still the same things, just a different way to adjust the same sorts of curves adjustments. So that should be it. We should have gotten through the hue, saturation, and luminance charts there. We should have gotten through the vectors, that sort of thing, curves, all of this, right? So let's take our last image here. Now let's say that we've just been given this shot and we want to go through and we want to really dive deep, you know, exactly what we were going to do once we've got it. Now, I always open up my tools, obviously, but let's do this. Let's fit this here. Let's make this bigger. And here's how I would go about taking a shot. Now, looks all right in terms of the variance here, but the first thing I want to do is make sure that what I'm dealing with is white. So I want to take away anything that is peaking. I want to get it right within my boundaries there. And it looks like there's a lot of yellow in those highlights. So we're going to bring that down a touch. Make it a little more white. This line here is going to be my skin tone, so I don't want to damage those. But I would take each one of these, sort of get it in line, right? Bring up my midtones here. So it's a little bit closer to white. I could even say the gain balance needs to be equal to this right here. Let's say this right here. And it'll actually adjust. I could also isolate my midtones. You generally want to find middle gray with this. Say that. Or my dark tones is going to be this black. Right, you see how it adjusts? Great option for getting it done quickly. So now I have a white image, right? This is the color correction phase of this done. Now I want to start stylizing. I might add an S-curve. Don't always add an S-curve, but you know. for the sake of priming you guys on this, let's say I want my brights to be a bit brighter and my darks to be a bit darker. Very carefully with this. I'm going to take out a bit of that. I want to add in a bit of this. Right? And let's isolate some colors here. I want my greens, which this is going to be my greens. Looks like it's that hill over there. I want this to be this way. Let me bring that down a bit too, so that creates a little bit more difference between there. The yellow is going to be a pretty major one. We can either go much greener with it, or we can go, you can make really dramatic changes here, but I usually like to see. That looks good. The red generally picks up a lot of skin tone. It's probably going to get a lot of this too. Let's make sure that our skin tones are generally in line. Also generally like to bring up the luminance of my skin tones so that I've got more of a glow. Maybe a little more saturation. The pink is going to be this. Yeah, I like it this way. Kind of draws the eye up. Okay, so I like that. I'm digging this. This is what I had before. This is what I have now. Much richer colors, much more natural sort of feeling to it. Really defines here. And then if I wanted to make any sort of isolation changes, I might do that. But this generally looks fine to me. So this is color correction in a nutshell. You may want to get really crazy with it. You may want to isolate different colors. Maybe you wanted her shirt to be red instead of this green color, right? You might go into your vectors, take your greens. You might bring it much more towards it's yellow. Yeah. But it's just playing around with it. It's a push and a pull. It's finding what you like and sticking with it. I like much more contrasty and saturated images. Not everybody does, but let's take this. One last thing I wanted to talk to you guys about is, so say you've got an image here, right? And I like this, but it is easy to go far with it. So you want to take a look at what you can do here. So I can actually change the opacity of each of these layers, right? So if I want my color wheels to be really high, or man, that curves adjustment is too much, let's take it back a notch. I can do that. Or my vectors, I can say, hey, let's bring this much closer to this is definitely different things. One more thing to go over here. Let's talk about blend modes. Now, blend modes are how an image is responding to another image. First of all, let's make sure that this is the same size as the other image, right? You can go over here to compositing. This would be how you're like making things fit together. So if I wanted to subtract, right, it is taking out her, adding it over, and kind of splitting the difference, right? You can darken, so the darkest parts are showing the image through. You can multiply, which mixes them together. Different ones are going to do different things. You want to, play around with them. I usually will go through and I'll try and see which ones I like the best. I'll click around from a few. Sometimes I just know what it is. Like if I'm really wanting to take just the dark parts out of an image, I might use one of these. Subtracting generally takes the light parts out of the image a little bit more. That sort of thing. I mean, you can play with these. I can't really get into all of these in a primer, but overlay is a pretty popular one. Generally lays the images on top of each other. It's still maintaining a lot of these colors, but it's taking out some of the middle tones, things like that. So you're still seeing a little bit of the other images. Hard light is going to change things. It all changes. Sometimes it doesn't even do anything. But this should get you a pretty in-depth look at what color correction is and what it has to offer. From there, the tools are yours. It's really just imagining what you can do in that situation. You can teach the tools in, just a few minutes, but at the same time, you got to actually go out and do it. But please like, comment, and subscribe if you like this, and we'll get some more content going. But it was a pleasure as always, and you guys have a wonderful evening.